it's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job.
Hi, this is Guy Wallace, and this is the Pursuing Performance Podcast. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Today I'm chatting about pursuing performance in the L&D space in an enterprise context with my guest, Tom Bailey. Tom, could you please quickly introduce yourself for those in our audience who may not be familiar with you and your work? And we'll wrap up this episode a little bit later talking about your work, going in depth and talking about, what you're doing and your consulting services and all of that stuff and how people might connect with you. But please introduce yourself.
Perfect. Hello, Guy. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So my name's Tom Bailey. I am an award-winning L&D professional. Most of my career has been in the consumer markets. I currently head up learning and development in a financial services organization and have my own agency. And I am super passionate about everything innovative around performance.
Well, very good. So let's talk about what I call performance-based instruction. There's many, many names for this going way, way back. So I'm kind of going old school with that phrase because that's what I first learned, and then it became performance-based training. Now it might be performance-based learning, but I include in instruction both performance guides, better known as job aids or performance support, and then learning experience, which back in the day were known as training or education. And sometimes just learning, but learning experience now is the cool and hip phrase for that. So I subscribe to that. But in looking at language, what do you typically refer to those things as?
Yeah, we love language in learning and development or in performance circles. We get so wrapped up on our own words, and then we forget about our customers. But I'm with you. So I'd probably call it resources,
Okay.
and then experiences along with it. But it's all interventions. The language of most of my customers is typically training, and they mean training generically for everything. Now,
Right.
obviously, if I've got a slightly more advanced person, then they might talk to me about courses versus resources versus tools. But I don't know. There was a wise man who once said to me something along the lines of everything's already been invented, but we forget about it. I think his name was Guy Wallace.
Yeah,
But
we talked about, well, I know what's old is new again on the podcast we did together about a year
yeah,
ago. But yeah.
yeah. But it's funny, like you talk about job aids, and I class them all as resources, right? So it's
Yeah.
whatever tools you're using. And there's a popular phrase, resources over courses, right?
Right.
Because ultimately you
Nick
want to get as close
Shackleton
to the
Jones.
Nick Shackleton Jones. I'll mention him a few times because I love his work. But um, resources, almost we've forgotten about it. So if a line manager, and they do come to me and say, oh, we need training, we need some training on, and pick a topic. We need training on, I don't know, pick anything. But we need training on one of those very popular behavioral studies that I won't name because there's so many of them. And I'll say, oh, great, what is it you want? Anyway, long story short, they haven't even thought about resources. They don't even think that falls into my remit. They just think, well, you put training on, you facilitate stuff. And it's I mean, I guess for a lot of us in the industry, if we're dealing with folk who haven't maybe had a formal L&D department, or maybe they're new to it, or maybe they're just in an industry that isn't interested, we spend a lot of time trying to influence to go, oh, that's great. Tell us more. What is it you really need? Oh, actually, on the job training. Wow, we've got resources we can give you. Have you heard of a cheat sheet? Oh, wow, a checklist. So innovative, so new, but yet no one really thinks about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, our everybody we work with generally came through an education system, and so that's similar but different.
Yeah.
And so they don't think about things like a job aids or what, because the first exposure to it that I had, it was called guidance. But when I was exposed to this concept of guidance, it was already better known as job aids, and then it got switched to electronic performance support systems and
Mm.
performance support and a bunch of different other names. And but regardless of the means to the
Mm.
ends of performance, how do you go about measuring the success, the outcomes of all those kinds of different L&D outputs?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to name drop a couple of people here. The first being, if you haven't seen his work, then Kevin M. Yates, the L&D detective, is someone I would call on. He's like your superpower if you're really struggling with measures. He's got some free resources out there, and he's got some really good practices. I'd always start with the end in mind. I know it sounds really obvious, but what is it you're actually measuring? What does the business do? So traditionally, I talk a lot with commercial teams. So if I'm speaking to a sales team, I'm normally talking revenue, or I'm talking some degree of how they are generating revenue.
Hmm.
Maybe they're saving cost as well. If it's a marketing team, it's all around reach, brand awareness, share of voice. So that's their currency, right? So and,
Right.
and then supply chain could be time or effectiveness, but each of these organizations has their own currency that they use, and
Hmm.
linking to that makes you relevant, and not linking to that makes you completely irrelevant. Uh, so if you want to start talking about attendance on participation, you can. No one else is really going to be that interested, or they might pretend to be interested, but is it going to change anything? No,
Yeah,
unless
that's the hope
yeah,
I
unless
think
you're selling
people
tickets.
who talk about that have is that, we just, it's the Harold Stolovich book, telling ain't training. And so a
Mm,
lot of people think that if you just tell them, well, they're going to know and they're going to be able to do, but that's not true. But I think we're always, been battling that. We will forever be battling those kinds of things.
mm,
But
mm,
let's talk about the whole L&D development process. If you
mm.
were to be in charge of it or doing it all yourself or whatever, so what is it end to end, and how does it all start?
Yeah, what? It all starts with questions, and that's probably dumbing it down massively. But again, another name drop. If you haven't heard of Nigel Harrison and his performance consulting approach, then I would urge you to go and check it out because it's a great place to start.
One of your
And the
recent
beauty,
podcasts.
yeah, it was on my podcast, but he's been on many, and his practice is great. And I've got a question back to you actually after I answer this, but I would always start with performance consulting because it allows you to identify what that problem is and helps you address whatever the actual issue is. And I'll give you a quick story about where that played out for me. So I was working for a global multinational. I'm trying not to use the names. And as always, I was talking to a line manager. He said to me, you know what, Tom? You know what we really need? My team need help with presentation skills. And I said, presentation skills. Great. Tell me more about what you mean by presentation skills. And this person talked to me about how his team would turn up and present, but they didn't do it in a very good way. Long story short, focusing on the output, it wasn't actually that it's a presentation skills issue. Because what does that really mean? Is that how do I use PowerPoint? Is it how I effectively present, and therefore is it around confidence? You go deeper and deeper and deeper. Anyway, for this particular line manager and this team, it was really about consistent sales approach. So they weren't really following a consistent um, edict of how do they sell. So they were going
Mhm.
off. Now, I wouldn't have known that. I could have quite easily just gone, yeah, sure, presentation skills, great. I could stand in a room and tell you how to present brilliantly, or get someone else to do it, and I could, introduce them and facilitate it. But that wouldn't have changed anything. That would have made no difference.
Right.
And early on in my career, it just stuck with me that I could have gone down two very different paths at that point, and not just I would have not just not answered the problem and solved the issue, but also would have made a brand for myself where oh, you go to Tom when you need something or your team feels a bit sad or lonely, and he'll put something on for you and he'll make you feel really good for a little bit. And that would be my brand. And I think that is my second point when you think about building your team. If you start with performance consulting, think about what you want to be known for. What's that L&D team known for? What are you known for? Because in a lot of organizations, you are the only person there, or there's two of you or three of you. If you are fortunate to work in a team of 40 or something like that, then good luck to you and well done. But you still need to be known for as or known for something. What do you want that to be known as? And I would suggest it's about adding value. So you talk about performance a lot, I know, Guy. What is it you want to be known for? You want to be known for changing performance and changing behavior positively. And you do that by taking a scientific approach. My question to you is I love Nigel Harrison's performance consulting. I don't really know any others. I've come across a few in my time, but what do you use?
So I was exposed to the work of a guy named the late Gary A. Rumler, PhD from the University of Michigan. And he was very instrumental in my professional society, which when I started, it was the National Society for Performance and Instruction. It's now ISPI, International Society for Performance Improvement. And they had gone from programmed instruction and realizing that even if they had stellar programmed instruction, they weren't changing the needle. And they started to look at all the variables. And Tom Gilbert, who's known as the father of human performance technology, was a business partner of this Gary Rumler for about 10 years. But anyway, so he has a book out, came out in early 2000s, the Serious Performance Consulting. He's got articles and things that go way back into the 60s. He taught at the University of Michigan, basically performance-based training plus. So you would be looking at all the variables because if training wasn't going to solve it, let's not even build that. Let's focus on the root causes for the problem or opportunity. So he was well known in the field in the States. Um, and so he's the person I would go to. But in that professional society, ISPI nowadays, there are many, many people. Carl Binder is still very active. He took Gilbert's behavior engineering model, which is known in Carl's world as the six boxes. And so there's a bunch of different diagnostic tools that can also aid in design. So you can use them in analysis and you can use them in design when you're looking at a performance system. And of course, if you're focused strictly on L&D, I mean, I come at all of this as an L&D practitioner, but I want to not do training or instruction or learning if it's not going to solve the problem, because what's the good of that? And then my reputation will suffer, and I'll be known for not adding value, but adding negative value, which is, ain't no good. But so there are people, numerous people that are still active today as part of that society, and I won't start rattling off a bunch of names, but a lot of my early mentors came from that world. But I also had mentors that came from the total quality management world because we're all trying to, OD, L&D, HR, and operational engineers and business process engineers, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is to improve performance, make it more effective and efficient, et cetera. And, if we stay in our lanes, then we've got to learn how to collaborate with all those people. But as always, it depends on, your context. Maybe there is no OD person. And so, how do you then cover that? Do you try to do that yourself or do you go get extra resources? And these are all the challenges. But there are people, and, thanks for kind of asking that question because Carl Binder is one of my favorite people. He comes at all of this from the Gilbert angle, and I come at it from the Rumler angle. And those two guys didn't always get along because they used different language for basically the same thing. They had nuanced views, and they were all, strong people. And so, 10 years, all they could take of each other, I think, is some of the rumors I've heard. I don't know for a fact.
Isn't that refreshing though? Because how many times do you go to an event now where it's another panel and everyone agrees with everyone? Wouldn't it be great to have those two guys on stage and, kick it out against against each other? How entertaining would that be?
I mentioned this on our podcast before, but David James and his podcast
Yeah.
invited Nick Shackleton Jones and me and a third person to be the kind of the moderator, the person asking the
Yeah.
questions. And they wanted us to, be controversial, oh, I don't agree with him. And we didn't do that, or at least I
No.
couldn't play that way because I had read his first edition of his book. I've not read the
Yeah.
update, but
Yeah.
but so I get it because I learned a long time ago that most of us talk about all of this differently. We have a different mental model, we have different imagery, we have different labels for things. And anything that you could name in L&D has got at least five different names over the course of the 40 some years that I've been involved.
Definitely.
So somebody like Nick who talks about this very differently and
Mm.
and comes at this, different than most people.
Mm.
I think that it's important for all of us to really work to understand what it is they're saying and how that might fit into your own processes and practices and principles. So because there's value there, and
Mm.
my one of my sayings is, adopt what you can and adapt the rest. Well,
Mm.
I've been doing that my entire career. I've taken something from Gilbert, I've taken some from Rumler,
Mm.
Harlan, all these names, Bob Mager, and borrowed or stole from
Yeah.
them and constructed my own thing, which is just a starting place because every project is different. You got to modify everything. So I think that, we could ask for controversy, and there are disagreements, but I just hate it if it becomes, one of these false fake things where I
Yeah.
pretend that
True. True.
I'm for
Yeah.
something when I'm really not. Um,
Well, it's
but
it's
if
it's
we do find
inauthentic,
people
isn't
who
it?
are really talking about the differences because the science isn't settled,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
research hasn't settled it, then I think it's fair game, and I think we should hear debates. But I've seen them in the past where it's all kind of phony baloney stuff, and it's like pro wrestling.
Yeah. But it's the same with the panels. It's an inauthenticity. Everyone agrees with everyone, or it's a trite, fake disagreement like your Royal Rumble. And that was your analogy. But yeah, you just want authenticity. So for example, let's talk about AI. Mean, let's not, but let's talk about AI in a debate setting, right?
Yeah.
How should we be using it? How should we be rolling it out? That would be a great debate.
Yeah,
And
it's all reminiscent to me when I was at Motorola in '81. Computers were coming to the factory floor. Well, and my clients, I served manufacturing materials and purchasing, and they asked me to bring some computer training to their people, all throughout the whole manufacturing floor. And I said, "Well, what's the performance?" And they said, "Well, we don't know." And I go, "Well, how can I do performance-based training if you don't know what the performance is?" And my client, very wisely, because I was a purist, and so he had to, affect me. And he said, Guy, our people are pretty darn smart, and this computer thing is new to them, and so they just need to know how it operates, and we want them to figure out how to use it in our manufacturing facilities, and then they will know what the performance is. But we're on that leading bleeding edge. Those weren't his words, but they were all on the leading bleeding edge, and so this was all new. So I think that from an AI perspective, it's evolving. It's still evolving. Will it ever stop? There'll always be continuous improvement, I would guess. But we need to know enough about it so we can understand how our clients are using it, so we can help them train other people on their best practices that will be evolving. And everything
Mm,
that we produce for them is probably going to have a short shelf life because it's a moving target. And that's why you read is that there's these new things coming out all the time, and everybody's a little bit different, then they catch up to each other, and so it's the wild west, so to speak. But I think that's all we can do is help. But if we don't have a clue about AI ourselves, let alone start cooking it into our processes, taking
mm,
over some of the work that it can do with our guidance, with our oversight, et cetera. But it is all new, and it's going to be a little bit messy. But if we just are focused on performance, our performance and our clients' performance of the target audiences, the learners that we're to address, that's all we can do. And we got to appreciate that it's going to maybe be messy and there are going to be mistakes made, but that's how it goes.
Yep, yep, yep.
What's your take on the field at large, L&D in particular? What's going on right now in your view, and what are some of the issues as you see them?
Yeah, I'm not talking about AI, but so I haven't mentioned yet, but I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and I know you've had Ryan Tracy on here as well, who's in my neighbourhood and in my community, and but I'm originally from the UK and I've lived in different places. Um, so I've got a slightly different view than some people, but it is nuanced in so much as because I'm based in Sydney, we are. In Australia, we're mostly a local market. We were talking about it earlier, the global time zone. I mean, we're ahead of the world, apart from New Zealand, in terms of time zones. So it's really hard to base a global business here. I am actually at a global business at the moment, but it's a lot of late nights and early mornings.
Hmm.
And I would say that for the most part, Australia as a market is local market. And because of that, we are probably more tactical than we are strategic as an industry. I'm making broad brush statements.
Yeah.
But then if I then mix in the whole world, and this is really hard because context is king, as you know, I would say that um, listen to any of the commentators. The temptation to put on training calendars and provide services that aren't measured and tick a training box are still there. And I feel like we're still having the same discussion. So people are still doing this. We've still got a long way to go in that. Having said that, I think that with the unrelenting pace of technology, we are being forced to get better because we're either being replaced or we're not. So this is a very contentious statement, and I'm going to get probably hounded for this, but instructional design increasingly, unless you are at the technical end of instructional design, AI could pretty much have your lunch already. So we all know Articulate, which is probably one of the biggest authoring tools for e-learning. Articulate has a built-in AI, which a guy said to me the other day, who's never worked in L&D, works in Insights. He said, I went to that Articulate to look at building some compliance. Took me half a day. I just built a compliance module. Now, it's not good. It's really boring, but it ticks the box, and that's what compliance is. So, he's happy. His customers are happy. He doesn't even work in L&D. So I think the danger is that the bits that don't add value, I think their day is coming, and we are forced to either go into the bits where we add value, or the bits, or find a new profession, I guess, which is what we've talked about for ages. I know you've talked about this, and we could list at least 10 people who are global thought leaders who've said the same. So I think that's where our profession is. I'd love us to still do better. It frustrates me when I go to events and we're still talking about the same things. You must frustrate you too, Guy. You've been doing this longer than me.
Well, and I was
Um,
talking with somebody else about this, and there's a big churn in our field, so there's always a bunch of new people, and they need to
there
be
is.
taught the basics. And again, this is where that whole INA thing comes in. We need to freshen it up. We need to rename it. It's new and improved, but nothing changes but the name. And so there's always attending to the new people, which is a fairly large market,
It is.
a size of the market, a demographic, and then people who have been around for a while get bored with that same old stuff because there's nothing going on. Regarding the technology, I think the technologies have been a great enabler for performance support. I
Mm,
mean, now we can, it can be in your pocket, pick a pocket
yeah.
and we can have something in there that can give you step-by-step guidance, not only in the behavioral tasks, the doing tasks, but the thinking tasks. How to think about this before you choose option A, B, or C,
Mm,
because, this of situational variables. So how to make it contextual, how to understand the variations. So I think until AI comes around to do this, and it probably will at some point, the upfront analysis, and probing for the nuances in a performance context that people need to work in, and then looking at it, maybe site by site, because what are the similarities, what are the differences, and really getting a good feel for that. But at some point, AI is going to be able to interview people at all the various sites and at the master level of performance and the rookies, and figure out, how to attend all of that. But um, and we may not like it. When e-learning came about, any
Yeah.
subject matter expert could create a course and did,
Yeah.
and we should
You,
all be ashamed of ourselves, right? Because it was some of the most boring stuff. Now, if it's
it was.
compliance, it
Yeah.
had to be done, and somebody had to
Yeah.
do it, and so. It's sad to say that most people have a check the box, get it done, have people take it, get it done. Did they learn anything? Will it change their
Yeah.
behavior? I just met the letter of the law,
Did
rather
you?
than, hopefully, complying with whatever the
Yes.
guidance was and what's behind that.
Did you
Um,
ever watch the movie Office Space?
I have not watched. No, I have not watched that.
Like 1990s. It's a classic bit of kind of what is it? Ron Livingston, Jennifer Aniston, kind of cult following, and it's got a guy in it. So basically, they bring the consultants in. It's classic kind of scene, right? They bring consultants in to like fire a load of people, and there's a guy there who's an account manager. And he says he's defending his job basically. He's been put under a lot of pressure, and he says, "Well, I talk to the engineers and then talk to the customer." And they say, "Well, so what do you actually do then? What value are you adding?" He says, "Well, I talk to the engineers because they can't talk to customers. They're awful people. They don't know how to talk to a customer. So do you physically take the order then from the customer to the engineer and the product back?" And he's like, "Well, no, because they just make it and it gets written down. My secretary does that." Anyway, it's a very good scene, very good movie. But it just reminds me sometimes of how L&D gets itself into that position where are we adding any value here? We're taking something from a customer who doesn't know what they're asking for, and then we're getting someone else, or in some circumstances, getting someone else to actually do the work for us if it's an external agency or, somebody else, an ID maybe creating it. What
Yeah.
value are we adding in that situation? Why are we here?
So
I just,
I
yeah.
learned a long time ago, rather than lament the state of the profession, because
Mm,
it's always, opportunity rich, if you will.
mm. It
Um,
is absolutely.
I would encourage people to learn how to be more performance oriented, to add
Mm,
value, measurable results in the impact that your L&D products and services can render, and look at that as a way to distinguish yourself. It's a
mm.
competitive advantage when you can do that and
Yep,
everybody else isn't. And that was
yep,
my experience, quite frankly, because I would go and talk to prospects, talk the language of the business, ask them about,
mm,
well,
mm.
there's this thing. What do you call that? Oh, okay. So then I would start using their language, which
Yep.
they always appreciate because they didn't want to learn
They
mine.
do.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and and talk about, the goal is performance. We talk about this in business terms. L&D is like a means to get there, but we don't need to talk about the details. I want to be
Yep,
crystal clear that, you want to move the ball from where to where,
yep,
measurement wise. And,
yep.
you know, because the clients that you're talking to, they're thinking education. Some teacher waltzes into the
Yeah,
front of the room, delivers
yep,
a lecture, gives a test, and end of it, and you go to the next class. So they're not
yeah,
really thinking about it unless they've been in the military or whatever, where they went through training where it was drill and
yeah,
practice so that you did get good because they made you get good. And if you didn't, you did extra push-ups and running around at night. Um,
yeah,
so so I
yeah.
the field is always been struggling, but there's hope for people who
Oh,
know
totally.
how to make a difference.
Well, think about, you mentioned it earlier. We're like a revolving door in L&D. There's constantly new people coming in because the majority of us haven't studied L&D at university. We've studied something else. We've been in a different field. I myself come from sales and marketing, and so I have massively leveraged my sales and marketing in L&D
Yeah.
so that everything that I create is really sticky and aspirational for the end user. But equally, that I'm selling to my actual customers, the people who are making decisions, people who come to me. I know how to manage that relationship. But whatever your background, you can leverage your experience,
Yeah.
bring that richness in.
The whole sales and marketing effort is the one thing that I think most L&D professionals are fearful of. and so they're afraid to try. And if you're going to be in your own business, as an example, you have to be able to sell yourself and your services. And even if you're an internal consultant, you need to be able to sell and negotiate
Yep.
and get to some common ground with the customer. Um, because if you're in it for the customer and measured results for them, you don't really just take the order and go execute. You got to make sure that your order fulfillment process, has the right things in it that will make sure
Mm.
that you produce a good product that will have a positive impact and not a
Yep.
nil or negative impact.
Yep.
Um,
Think about how simple spin is, right? I know you referenced spin on one of
yeah.
your LinkedIn. It Don't tell salespeople this, but they're not complicated people, right? So they've got simple frameworks. If you, as an L&D expert, can get your head round spin and use spin, and by the way, you can, anyone can, it's not complicated.
Sure.
You could transform your practice. We're not even talking about AI now. We're talking about stuff that's been around since day dot, because every sales process is broadly the same. Pick a sales process. If you don't like spin, pick medic, pick the 4 Ps. There's so many out there, and
Yeah.
try it. Have a go. Start thinking about how you are selling, and how you are influencing those people around you.
So speaking of influencing people, so my next question is about, people and or resources. So if you had to name 3 to 5 different people and or resources that you would recommend that others follow, take a look at, read, consume, whatever,
Mm.
what would those be?
Well, we probably already mentioned them, but probably the number one is Nick Shackleton-Jones' book, How People Learn. Like you, I read the first edition. I haven't seen the second, but I read it quite early on in my. Well, no, it wasn't that early in my career, but it was very transformational. The way it's written is really straightforward. The ideas are, I think, revolutionary to a rote learning mindset. And I would advocate for that book, probably above all books. Oh, there are so many great books out there. But that's probably my favorite because of the impact it had.
Hmm.
Something that you've been on, which I'm always been a massive fan of, is the David James podcast. So the L&D podcast by David James.
Yep.
It's like there's some brilliant podcasts out there. Thinking Learning Uncut down here. You've got
Yep.
Jess Almaty in the States. There's so many great podcasts, but David James one, I think, and even go back to his early. If you want to get a real handle on the fundamentals of L&D, pick his first 10 episodes. Go back in time.
Yeah.
They're gold. Um, I would probably reference Michelle Parry Slater and her book, The Learning and Development Handbook. It's less of well, you can read it cover to cover. I use it like a handbook, so it's a really good reference point to go. And she's just come out with a second edition, but really good to just kind of nip into and take bits out of. And then lastly, because we've mentioned him so much, or I mentioned him earlier, Nigel Harrison's performance consulting. I just think it's, yeah. If you dumb down, and he would kill me for saying dumbing it down, but if I was to dumb down his brilliant model, just ask questions and try and understand the situation and what that gap is. And it's again, this stuff is dynamite for your practice.
Yeah.
How about you? What I want to know what your top three are.
Well, so
Good
I'm
luck.
so I'm big fan. So there's a body of work from Gary A. Rumler.
Mm,
And there's a body of work from Neil Rackham. Now, Neil Rackham is known for spin selling, and Huthwaite had win-win negotiations programs back in the early 80s.
mm, mm, mm.
Neil is no longer associated with them. I mean, he does things with them on occasion, but he's no longer part of the company, and I think he's retired now. But
Mm.
but he had a video. My very first day at Motorola, which was actually this is the anniversary of it. So what is it? 51 years ago. It was 1981. So 55 years ago, I guess. Is that right? 45 years ago. And
Yeah.
he was there for a 1 day workshop, and he presented on the 10 design criteria. And the 10 things he talked about are things that we're talking about now, like they're brand new. Um,
Yeah.
and of course, different language because of then. But his very first company was oriented on performance, and he was doing behavior modeling on things. And he got a project to work on sales, And so that became his niche. And he, has all the data, and the whole spin selling thing is a Socratic process to understanding, the spin is what's the situation, and then what's the problem or opportunity within that? What are the implications? Big deal, little deal, what? And then what's the needs payoff? So that if you said, I have a solution, a consulting service, or a widget, and I can sell it to you for $1 million to solve your $14 million problem because we already established Socratically, you know, what is important to you, and now I can pair my services with that. So yeah, you can use spin for selling L&D products and non-instructional services as well. So Rumler and Rackham. Plus,
Yep.
I got so much out of Gilbert and Harless and Bob Mager. Those were, and these are very old school, but this is what I grew up on in the
Mm.
business and learned from because I have a radio TV film degree. So I didn't come into this
Yep.
with any kind of a background. And there were degreed programs going on, but there were darn few of them back in those days.
Mm. Mm.
So
Yeah, love it.
So we're going to get close to wrapping up here, but so I wanted to give you an opportunity. If you were to give advice to our audience,
Mm.
whether they're, the new people coming in or the some people with experience, but what final words of advice might you have for our audience regarding, the whole L&D practitioner and leadership world?
My one bit of advice would be to take a consultancy mindset. And what I mean by that, and it's really prevalent for us in L&D, as I said, we can normally be quite isolated. We're doing something that most people aren't doing. And the danger is that we get overwrought, especially as an employee. If you take that employee mindset, oh yeah, I just do what the boss says, yeah, hierarchical business, okay. Whereas actually, if you take a consultancy mindset, you're stepping back from it. You're taking a lot of curiosity to understand the problem. And it's funny, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I've moved back into a permanent role at the moment, and I have thought of doing a 9 to 5. I still don't think I am, even though I am. I very much think of myself and see myself as a consultant, even though I'm back into a full-time job.
Sure.
So I will make time in my day for coffees with industry people. Now, my business doesn't care; they see the benefit of that. But it's that consultancy mindset. If you apply that to every aspect of what you're doing in learning and development, you will see better returns. You'll see a better brand. You'll see better outcomes. So that is my one bit of advice. What's yours?
So the things that I would advise people are a couple things, and it's all about the front end of the process, whether you believe in Addy or not. But to me, project planning and kickoff is really, really key. It includes intake, it includes drafting a project plan, it kick off with the stakeholders so that you can manipulate them into deciding that this is a worthy business investment, and then they will resource it with the right people to do the right things at the right time. If you get that done well, the path is easier going forward rather than fighting for resources and all that. So that's really critical. Doing a performance-based analysis, understanding performance and the gaps, understanding what the enabling knowledge and skills are, doing the whole analysis thing and doing it quickly is really, really key. So, and taking a performance consulting or performance improvement consulting lens to all of that so that you're really looking at, beginning with the end in mind, what's the terminal performance? What are the people supposed to be producing as products or services that are inputs downstream? So what is
Mm.
that and how do you know a good one from a bad one? Who are the stakeholders? How do they measure that? And then what's the process to produce that? And who are the stakeholders for that? And how do they measure that? And if you understand all of that, I think design can be pretty straightforward
Mm.
and easy, and then developing to the design can also be very easy. So I think
Mm.
that front end of project planning and kickoff and analysis is so critical. And I think that that's where people can differentiate themselves, working with the
Yeah.
clients to understand the nuances. Is AI going to be able to do that for us someday? Yeah, maybe. Will they do it as well? It depends on whether effectiveness is more more or less important than efficiency. And,
But
we're always trying to balance that. Be effective, be
yeah.
efficient, being effective, but don't be efficient and then, have a negative impact on effectiveness. And so
But
those
then
are the
you
kinds of things I worry about.
I think that's a really good point. And the juxtaposition, if you asked most people who don't work in L&D but are customers of it, they would probably say, if you objectively ask them, what is it L&D do, or what is it that they wouldn't training does, they wouldn't say, oh yeah, upfront, all the upfront work. No, they would say, oh, they do delivery, they do facilitation, they hold courses, they run programs. It's all
Right.
the output. So it's a really great juxtaposition to go, actually, it's all the setup that really counts. That bit's the bit that really moves the needle. So
Yeah, they
yeah,
don't
I
they don't
totally,
care to know how the sausage is made until you've
yeah.
demonstrated success after success. Then they want to know how they can assure that the next
Mm,
effort will be as successful. So how did you make that sausage?
mm, mm.
Um, but yeah, so their view of what training or education looks like is from our experience in the
Yeah,
educational system, and which has some variances, but pretty much we see teachers come in and teach stuff and give us a test, and
yeah,
really kind of that's it. It's all about knowledge. It's less about
yeah,
skill, knowledge and skill applied,
yeah,
because nobody knows what your job is going to be. So we learn
yeah.
simple applications, how to set up a spreadsheet, but to do a cash flow analysis, so that's more than just spreadsheets. You got to combine a bunch of things in order to address the performance so that you can produce
Mm,
a cash flow analysis.
mm, mm, mm.
But enough about me. I wanted to focus on, you and your work.
Mm.
And so why don't you tell us a little bit about, you told us you have a sales and marketing background. So how
Yep.
did you get into all of this? What's the kind of work that you're doing? What's the kind of work that you love to do? And if you have any offerings, articles, or whatever that people should take advantage of, I saw that you have some case studies on your website. Tell
Yep.
us a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So yeah, I come from a sales and marketing background. So a lot of my experience is in what I think most Americans would probably call CPG, and for the rest of the world, we probably call it FMCG, but consumer markets. So I've worked at people like Nestle and Coke and Kimberly Clark, physically making something. Latterly, I've moved into financial services, which is again a completely different industry altogether. But people are still the same. People still need to learn how to get better at something. So I come from that background. The spark for me was I remember I was working at Nestle at the time, and I'm always grateful for the company moving me across into learning and development. But I remember talking to my boss and saying there's two areas I'm really interested in. One is sustainability, and one is around people development. I love managing folk and I leading them. I love seeing the spark. It took me, I think, 3 days to realize that that sustainability was all about procurement. And that was not where I wanted to go. So yeah, I very quickly pivoted to, I think I started in coaching first. So I've got my ICF ACC and have maintained it for ages. And my practice is, like I said before, it's around probably more on the strategic end. So I have my own consultancy, which doesn't have a very flashy name. It's just my name. And I generally previously have worked with large global consumer businesses, but I've also worked with some local smaller organizations. And the bit of work that I normally do is from a ground up. What does great development look like? How do we plan a whole ecosystem in an organization? I normally take a helicopter view before I go down into the weeds. That's my approach. I've won various awards for my work, and last year was very proud to be named Learning and Development Professional of the Year here in Australia with the AITD. I do have a website and a LinkedIn, and I have a podcast. So all the best people have podcasts.
I will put
So
your LinkedIn
yeah,
URL and
thank you.
for your podcast and for your website in the show notes here, so people can more
Yes,
easily
thank
find you.
you. Yeah, so it's the Rogue L&D podcast. I try and just get to know people, if I'm honest. So one of the things I really believe in is community. I love that there's always events going on in learning and development. And wherever you live, unless you're dialing in from very, very distant, remote Nova Scotia, there's probably going to be events going on that you can go to. And even if you are dialing in from, I don't know, the desert in Kansas, I'm totally making this up now. Is there a desert in Kansas? I don't know. But wherever you're dialing in from, there'll be remote events you can go to. And I would encourage you to dive into that community. I'm a big believer in it, and I get very actively involved in our industry. And I think the more we do that, the more we get to learn from each other. So, and I know you're a big fan of that too, Guy. So yeah, I advocate for that. But in terms of my work, yep, I'm on a full-time piece of work with a company called OFX, where I head up learning and development function. And I still maintain my own consultancy business on the side.
Well, very good. Well, Tom, we've kind of covered my last question, which was how people can find you online to connect. And so, again, I'll share that all in the show notes. But I want to thank you for taking the time. This is a busy morning for you, evening for me. You're 14 hours ahead. I'm glad we were able to schedule this and get this done. But I appreciate what you're doing, and with your Rogue L&D Hotshots podcast. I think that I want to point people to that, because I think I've been listening to a few of the latest ones here, and I'm going to go back and catch up to the one that you and I did a year ago.
Yeah.
But again, thank you so much for sharing today.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you for everything you do for the industry.
So here's 3 pieces of additional advice. I may have mentioned this earlier. I think number 1, you should always be focused on the performance requirements of the learners back on the job, and you need to help enable their performance. And when you're learning from others, remember that you can always adopt what you can and adapt the rest. And finally, always give appropriate attribution to your sources. We too often don't acknowledge the fact that we are standing on the shoulders of many giants, and we should try to call them out by name on occasion.
It's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job. It's about performance.